If you're trying to build a sustainable future for the planet, you can't ignore the gravitational pull of India anymore. Geopolitically, economically, even culturally, it's like a rising second sun. The world used to orbit around just one or two powers. That's changing. And India is becoming a kind of stabilizer in a system that's spinning faster than ever. So let's zoom out. The global order is fragmenting. After decades of relative unipolar dominance by the United States post-Cold War, we're entering a multinodal world. You've got China aggressively expanding its influence. Russia isn't disappearing. And emerging coalitions like BRICS are rewriting how economic and political alliances are shaped. Now, in this chaos, what you actually need is a balancing force, a system-level counterweight that can prevent catastrophic failure. Think of it like a spacecraft with redundant thrusters. If one system overcorrects or fails, you need another one to stabilize the course. That's where India comes in. India is uniquely positioned. It's not in the Western Bloc. It's not fully aligned with China or Russia either. It's this in-between giant, a massive democracy with 1.4 billion people, nuclear capability, and a surging economy that might overtake Japan and Germany within the decade. But more importantly, India doesn't want to dominate the world. It wants strategic autonomy. That's a big deal because that means India can serve as a credible balancer rather than a new hegemon. It's not trying to impose ideology or push global supremacy. It's focused on its own development, regional stability, and selectively amplifying its influence where it benefits all parties involved. You could argue this makes India even more useful than traditional allies. Why? Because India's neutrality in global power games makes it a kind of bridge state able to talk to the West, the East, and the global South with equal legitimacy. So from the US perspective, or anyone interested in long-term equilibrium, you need a player that can check China's ambitions without triggering a kinetic war. You need a partner that can collaborate in AI, semiconductors, space, and green tech without ideological rigidity. India checks those boxes. And let's be real, India's geography alone makes it indispensable. Nestled between the Himalayas and the Indian Ocean with choke points that control much of global trade, whoever India partners with gets leverage, reach, and resilience. Look, China is a superpower. Let's not kid ourselves. It has economic velocity, manufacturing dominance, and long-term strategic planning that most democracies don't even attempt. But there's a problem. China's rise isn't coming with trust. Global markets are uneasy, neighbors are on edge, and democracies are skeptical. So from the perspective of long-term global stability, you don't want to escalate, but you also can't be passive. That sips where the US has to make a smart move. Instead of a direct face-off, which could be economically suicidal and potentially spark a military conflict, the intelligent play is geopolitical buffering. You don't compete with brute force. You use distributed resistance. That's where India comes in. India shares a massive border with China, and it's not just a line on a map. It's an active friction point. Skirmishes have happened, tensions run deep, but India isn't reckless. It doesn't seek war. It seeks strength. And here's the kicker. India is building up its own capacity in ways that are sustainable. Naval power in the Indo-Pacific, joint defense exercises, homegrown military tech, and strategic choke point control in the Indian Ocean. All of this creates a natural counterbalance to Chinese dominance, especially in the East. The US doesn't need to install bases everywhere. It doesn't need to ramp up military escalation. If it partners with India and respects India's independent posture, it gets something better, local resistance with global legitimacy. Think of it this way. India is already resisting China. It bans Chinese apps. It restricts tech investments. It builds its own chips. It aligns with Japan and Australia in the Quad Alliance while still talking to Russia and the global South. That's strategic agility. So instead of trying to pull India into a Western orbit, the smarter thing is to co-create a decentralized architecture, not US-centric, not China-centric, human-centric, where India can lead in its own lane while contributing to a larger stability equation. And remember, India doesn't need to beat China. It just needs to slow its unchecked expansion and force the system to recalculate. That's containment without confrontation. Let's think like engineers here. When you design a complex system, whether it's a spacecraft, a neural net, or a global supply chain, the number one rule is don't allow a single point of failure. That's what the global economy did with China over the past 2 decades. We centralized production, to optimize cost and speed, but at the cost of resilience. And then COVID, geopolitics, and trade tensions exposed the fragility of that model. The fix? You don't destroy the system, you distribute the load, you diversify, you de-risk. That's why companies across the US, from Tesla to Apple to semiconductor giants, are actively looking for next-gen manufacturing hubs. And guess what? India is emerging as the frontrunner. India is not just offering labor arbitrage. It's not just about cheap factories. That's a 1990s mindset. What India is building now is a scalable, digital-first, reform-driven ecosystem with incentives for electronics, clean energy, semiconductors, defense, and even space tech. They've launched the PLI production-linked incentive schemes that reward value creation. They've built digital infrastructure like Aadhaar and UPI that's more advanced than most Western nations. And now they're rolling out semiconductor fabs, defense corridors, and AI hubs with serious long-term planning. What makes this particularly interesting, and there's another layer, values alignment. When you manufacture in India, you're not embedding your IP into a tightly controlled authoritarian system. You're working within a legal and democratic framework, even if it's messy. That makes your business model more defensible in the long term. Plus, India understands the game. They're not naive. They know every major power, US, China, Russia, EU, wants influence, so they're playing multi-alignment with surgical precision. That's actually good for business because it ensures no extreme dependencies, which is exactly the philosophy behind de-risk supply chains. Companies that understand this are already acting. Apple is shifting iPhone production. Tesla is negotiating gigafactory terms. Global semiconductor firms are lining up to build partnerships. It's not hype, it's just an obvious next move in an era where resilience, raw efficiency. You can't afford a brittle system in a volatile world, and India is proving that it can be the flexible, scalable, and ideologically stable node that global supply chains need, not as a replacement for China, but as an intelligent alternative path in a multipolar supply web. If you're optimizing for long-term civilization development, governance models matter a lot. In 2025, we're seeing a clear divergence. On one end, autocracies are becoming more efficient, but more. That's a big reason the US needs to double down on its partnership with India, not just because they need a counterweight to China, but because India proves that democracy is still scalable, even under pressure. What's happening globally is this subtle but powerful trend. People are starting to believe authoritarianism works better, that it's faster, more decisive, more clean, but that's short-term thinking. You might build faster in a command economy, but you also suppress adaptability, autonomy, and creativity. Long-term progress requires friction. It requires disagreement, failure, experimentation. India embodies that. It's loud, it's chaotic, it's not always efficient, but it's real, and it's growing. And if the world is going to keep believing in open societies, then India is the most compelling case study we have in 2025. From the American perspective, this matters at a fundamental level. You can't claim to lead the free world. Of course, there are differences on trade, on policy, on global positioning, but that's actually the point. True democracies don't always agree. They collaborate through negotiation, not obedience. That's a strength, not a bug. There's also the narrative layer. In Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, the so-called global South, India has credibility that the West doesn't. It was colonized. It knows what it means to rise from. This isn't just about ideology. It's about building a future-proof system where countries aren't forced to choose between progress and freedom. India is showing that you can pursue space tech, AI, green energy, and defense capability and still let people speak, vote, argue, protest. That's the version of the future we should optimize for, not clean lines and top-down controls, but open loops, collaborative design, and decentralized evolution. And in that future, India is not just useful, it's essential. Let's talk systems integration. If you're thinking about the future, like really thinking 20, 30, 50 years ahead, there's no scenario where technology and defense evolve separately. They're deeply coupled. AI, space, cybersecurity, energy. These aren't just commercial sectors. They're strategic layers. And this new structure, India is rapidly becoming a high-value node. What's changed is that India is no longer just a consumer of Western tech. It's entering the co-creation phase. Think of it like going from passive node to active contributor in a global innovation network. Let's break it down. On the tech side, India has built a massive digital ecosystem. digital identity or real-time payments UPI, and now scaling into AI. From a defense standpoint, when you pair American R&D with India's engineering scale and cost efficiency, you get exponential leverage. You can prototype faster, iterate cheaper, and deploy more resilient systems. You're not just selling weapons, you're building future defense infrastructure together. Now let's talk space. ISRO has already landed on the moon, and its Mars mission was completed on a budget smaller than a Hollywood. And then there's cybersecurity. In a world of quantum threats and AI-enabled information warfare, having a democratic, tech-savvy ally like India in the intelligence sharing loop is non-negotiable. It's not about surveillance, it's about system-wide integrity. Supply chains, cloud infrastructure, financial systems, all of them require multi-layered trust mechanisms. India is in a position to help build those. This partnership is not just geopolitical, it's architectural. You're building a dual-stack future, one where democratic nations co-develop platforms, protocols, and defense systems that reflect their values, not just strategic interests. And unlike traditional allies who are often locked into bureaucratic or static frameworks, India brings a level of agility and risk tolerance that makes real innovation possible. It's not trying to be another version of the US. It's trying to be India 3.0, a self-reliant, innovation-driven force that can scale across sectors. If you're building the infrastructure for a multi-planetary future, a decoupled world, or even just a post-conflict stability system, India is a key integration partner, not just a client state. You build with them, not just for them. If you want to future-proof the global system, you can't just build for the top 10% of the world. You have to engineer solutions that work for the next 6 billion people, those in developing nations across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and beyond. This is the global South. And the reality is they're not buying into the traditional Western narrative anymore. Here's where India becomes uniquely valuable, not militarily, not economically, but culturally and diplomatically. It's the only major power that is both post-colonial and post-poverty and still rapidly ascending. That means it knows the pain points of the global South because it lived through them. And that gives India a level of credibility and relatability that the US, China, or Europe simply can't replicate. India doesn't lecture developing countries. It doesn't come in with ideological strings attached. It offers partnership, not patronage. That's a big difference. When India talks about solar energy, digital inclusion, or healthcare access, it speaks from experience of having built things like the largest biometric ID system, or telemedicine networks in remote areas, or cheap generic pharmaceuticals at scale. And here's the signal: when India speaks in BRICS summits or G20 forums, the room listens, not because it's powerful, but because it's relevant. It's the only G20 country that still feels like part of the global South in its core identity. That gives it soft power leverage that no amount of GDP or missiles can buy. This matters deeply to the US and other Western democracies. If you want to win the trust of the global South in 2025 and beyond, you can't go direct. The messaging doesn't land. The history is too complicated. But if you partner with India, you gain a diplomatic amplifier. India can translate values like freedom, innovation, and sustainability into local narratives that actually resonate across developing nations. That's not propaganda, that's empathetic diplomacy. And from a systems design perspective, it's far more effective than top-down influence campaigns. You also have to consider scale. The next 5 decades of innovation, whether it's green hydrogen, clean water, AI in agriculture, or decentralized finance, will only succeed if they can scale in the global South, and India is the ideal launchpad for that kind of real-world deployment. It has the population, the climate variability, the income diversity, and the institutional memory to test these systems under actual stress. So if you're thinking about building the infrastructure of a balanced, fair, and innovation-driven planet, India isn't just part of the plan. It's a critical interface layer between advanced nations and emerging societies. Not a gatekeeper, more like a protocol bridge between worlds. India's voice carries trust, and in the world we're heading into, trust is the rarest commodity of all. When we talk about the future of energy, let's start with energy. India's energy demand is set to double in the next 20 years. That sounds like a problem, but it's actually a huge opportunity. Why? Because if you can meet that demand using renewables, storage, and decentralized grids, then you're proving a model the entire global South can follow. Now the environment. India is on the front lines of climate impact, heat waves, floods, air quality issues. It doesn't have the luxury of waiting. So what you're seeing is forced innovation, water recycling at scale, low-cost air purification systems, green construction materials, all designed to be mass deployable. That's very different from solutions coming out of Western labs that cost millions per unit. India is optimizing for survival and distribution, not just performance. Now combine that with economic growth. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world right now, but it's doing this while attempting to leapfrog the fossil heavy industrial stage. That's incredibly hard, but if it pulls it off, it becomes a blueprint for the rest of the world. You get growth without repeating the environmental sins of the past 100 years. From a systems perspective, India is the proving ground. If it can grow its economy, power its population, and protect its environment simultaneously, that's the model you scale globally. It's the ultimate stress test for sustainability, and the results will inform how we design energy systems for Mars, rural Africa, or anywhere else infrastructure is constrained. So, if you're serious about decarbonization and inclusive growth, India isn't just a partner, it's the primary testbed for the next version of Earth. If you're building a global system, whether for trade, defense, or even satellite internet, you have to factor in geographic leverage. And India's location isn't just valuable, it's strategically irreplaceable. Zoom out on the map. India sits right between East Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. It's adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz, where a massive portion of the world's oil flows. It watches over the Indian Ocean, which handles over 70% of global maritime trade routes. That's not coincidence. That's natural geostrategic architecture. Now, in terms of military presence, India isn't trying to build empires, but it is quietly creating a layered defense posture. They have old bases in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, joint operations with the US, France, and Australia, and increased surveillance in the Indo-Pacific. All of it is about ensuring freedom of navigation in a region being heavily contested by China. You don't want to militarize everything. That's not a sustainable model, but you do want to ensure redundancy and resilience in your global logistics systems. India offers that. It's a checkpoint, a stabilizer between unpredictable zones like the South China Sea, Gulf states, and East Africa. From a Western perspective, especially the US, this is gold. You don't need 1,000 bases if you have a trusted regional partner with intelligence access, infrastructure, and strategic discipline. India gives you that not by becoming an extension of NATO, but by acting in its own aligned interest, regional stability without foreign dependence. And then there's space and cybersecurity. India has launch capabilities from near equatorial positions, ideal for fuel-efficient orbital placement. It also has the geographical reach for satellite triangulation, drone defense systems. So when you think about the next layer of defense, not just tanks and missiles, but data corridors, orbital security, naval logistics, and AI threat response, India isn't just in the mix, it's at the crossroads. Bottom line, you want a future where defense is smart, distributed, and adaptive. That requires strategic geography plus credible autonomy. India delivers both. Let's talk about soft infrastructure, the cultural wiring, global talent flows, and trust networks that actually power innovation and stability. In 2025, one of the most underrated forces shaping the future is India's global diaspora, especially in the US. Over 5 million Indian Americans now live in the United States, but it's not just about numbers, it's about nodes of influence. You'll find Indian origin professionals running Fortune 500 companies, leading NASA missions, driving AI research at top labs, and shaping policy in Washington. That creates a kind of cultural bridge architecture that's incredibly rare. This isn't the typical migrant success story. This is about deep integration into the engines of innovation. The Indian diaspora has become one of the most dynamic drivers of US growth in tech, healthcare, academia, and venture capital. And that creates a built-in alignment layer between the two nations without the need for constant negotiation. From a systems design point of view, this is powerful. You're not forcing cooperation from the top down. It's emerging organically from shared networks, common values, and collaborative mindsets, but it goes deeper. India's cultural exports, from yoga and Bollywood to digital spirituality and English language media, have created soft familiarity around the world. And that matters, because if you want to build trust in a hyper-connected, AI-driven world, culture is the API, and India has one that scales globally. This soft power extends to diplomacy. When India steps into global forums, it brings not just its own voice, but echoes of every region where its diaspora is active: East Africa, the Gulf, Southeast Asia, North America, Europe. It's like a distributed consensus layer, deeply embedded yet nationally rooted. For the US, this matters. It's not just partnering with the country, it's plugging into a global network of talent and influence. It also creates resilience against polarization. In a time when alliances are fragile and ideologies are hardening, the Indian-American connection offers a human, adaptable, long-term interface that isn't driven by geopolitics, it's driven by shared dreams. In the coming decades, soft alignment may prove more powerful than hard treaties, and with India, that alignment is already coded into the system. If you're building a decentralized, innovation-driven global future, then partnerships are everything. But here's the thing about India. It doesn't need to be anyone's sidekick. It has optionality, economic, military, diplomatic, and in 2025, that optionality is more real than ever. This is the critical design flaw in most Western strategies, assuming alignment by default. That's not how systems work. Alignment happens when interests intersect, and India's interests are constantly evolving. So if the US takes India for granted, others will step in. Russia has a deep legacy with India in defense, joint missile systems, aircraft, submarines. It's not just historical, it's still active. And China, meanwhile, is attempting soft engagement through BRICS plus expansion, trade corridors, digital yuan experiments. India is resisting for now, but if the West creates too much friction, India might pragmatically pivot, not ideologically, but strategically. For the US, this is a systems risk. If India gets pulled into a Eurasian tech finance military bloc or leans more heavily on regional alliances without US input, you lose the best positioned democratic counterbalance in the Indo-Pacific. That's not just a lost partner, that's a lost axis of influence in the most contested region on Earth. More importantly, you lose the chance to shape the next phase of global systems ethically, inclusively, and democratically. India isn't asking to be managed or contained, it's asking to be respected as an equal node in the network. That means partnerships based on shared outcomes, climate solutions, ethical AI, secure infrastructure, not lectures or conditional support. If the US fails to meet India in that framework, others will, and when they do, it won't be hostile, it'll just be efficient, strategic realignment, quiet but irreversible. In global strategy, inattention is more dangerous than opposition, and right now, losing India would be a high-cost error with long-term consequences the system may not be able to undo.